They don't call it a prison. They call it rehabilitation. You get a clean room, 3 meals a day, and counselors who never raise their voices. But every day you stay, you lose a little more of who you were. They don't break you with pain. They break you with kindness. And by the time you realize what's happening, you've already stopped wanting to resist. I remember the day I stopped being a prisoner and became something worse. My name is Arctis Bellis. I served the God Emperor of mankind aboard the frigate Unbreakable Resolve for 11 years, before the Battle of Kaij took everything I knew and left me breathing in a world that should not exist. The void is cruel. The Imperium demands sacrifice. But those truths were simple, clean, compared to what waited for me after the boarding klaxon stopped, and the bulkheads tore open and the enemy came through. I expected execution, torture, conversion into something grotesque, something nailed to a wall as a warning. What I received instead was patience. They gave me a room with soft light. They gave me time. They gave me questions I could not answer, and kindness I could not refuse, and silence that grew heavier every day until I could no longer remember why I was supposed to resist. The battle lasted 6 hours. Our cruiser escort died in the opening salvo. Our captain ordered close engagement despite the numbers, because retreat would dishonor the throne, and dishonor was a sin worse than death. I remember the deck vibrating beneath my boots as plasma drives roared, targeting servitors, chanting litanies in binary monotone. The smell of incense and gun oil. The sharp ozone tang that comes before the shields fail. I was in a secondary gunnery bay, feeding ordnance into macro cannons while the deck shook and the lights flickered and the Vox channels screamed conflicting orders, until they went silent all at once. That silence was worse than the noise. It meant the bridge was gone. It meant we were already dead. I felt the boarding craft punch through the hull before I heard it. The impact threw me against the bulkhead hard enough to crack my helmet visor. When I pushed myself up, the air tasted like burning metal and something else, something cold, sterile, something that didn't belong in the hot guts of an Imperial warship. My squad leader was shouting for a firing line, but half the crew were dead or unconscious, the rest stumbling through smoke that stung our eyes and made every breath feel like swallowing glass. I pulled my lost pistol, aimed at the breach, hands shaking not from fear, but from that raw, clean adrenaline that comes when you know you're about to die, and your training tells you to die well. The first figure through the smoke wasn't what I expected. Smaller than a man, wrapped in segmented armor that gleamed dull blue through the haze, moving with a precision that felt wrong, like it was following a script, not reacting to chaos. Its helmet had no face, just a smooth visor reflecting emergency lighting in streaks of red and amber. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It raised one hand, palm outward, and from somewhere behind it, a voice spoke, flawless, low Gothic, calm, measured, free of malice. The voice said we were defeated, that resistance would only cause unnecessary suffering, that we would be treated according to the customs of war if we laid down our weapons, that the greater good had no interest in martyrs. I pulled the trigger anyway. My lost bolt took the figure in the chest. It staggered back half a step, its armor absorbing the hit, then straightened as if nothing happened. My squad leader fired next. Then the others, a stuttering volley that lit the corridor like a strobe and accomplished nothing except wasting power cells. The figure didn't return fire. It simply waited. Behind it, more shapes emerged, taller, broader, carrying pulse rifles that hummed like distant thunder. And still they didn't shoot. They waited. The voice spoke again, this time with a faint edge of urgency, explaining that noncompliance would necessitate force, and such force would be precisely calibrated to minimize casualties but ensure submission. The choice was ours. My squad leader threw down his lost gun first. I don't blame him. The rest of us followed within seconds, dropping our weapons to the deck with a clatter that sounded like the breaking of something sacred. The figures moved forward, surrounded us, efficient, unhurried. I felt hands guide me to my knees without violence. Felt restraints fasten around my wrists, material like woven silk, not metal. One leaned close, its voice rendered into Gothic through some internal vox, and said I'd made the correct choice, that my cooperation would be rewarded with safety and dignity. I spat in the direction of its visor. It didn't react. It simply moved on to the next prisoner. The first hours of captivity were spent in the cargo hold of a Tau transport, a space so clean, so brightly lit, it felt like a surgical theater compared to the grimy functionality of Imperial ships. We were separated into groups of 10, each assigned a handler, a slim, blue-skinned figure in lightweight robes who introduced themselves with names I couldn't pronounce, explaining in calm tones we were being taken to a processing facility where our needs would be assessed and our futures determined. Other prisoners muttered prayers to the Emperor or sat in sullen silence. I watched everything, cataloging details the way I'd been trained to catalog navigational data. The walls were smooth, seamless, no rivets, no welds. The air smelled faintly of something floral, not shrine incense, but something that made my head feel light. The lighting had no flicker, no variance, just steady white glow that made it impossible to judge time. Our handler approached me after the first hour, knelt to meet my eyes. They asked my name. I refused to answer. They asked if I was injured. I said nothing. They nodded slowly, as if my silence was expected, even understood. Then they said something that stayed with me ever since. Anger is a reasonable response to displacement. You will be given time to process your situation before any decisions are required of you. Displacement, not capture, not defeat. The distinction felt intentional. I wanted to spit again, but my mouth was too dry. The handler stood and moved on, leaving me with a feeling I didn't yet have a name for, a feeling like being seen and dismissed at once. The facility appeared through the viewport as a low sprawl of white structures across a rust-colored plain beneath a sky too pale, too empty, devoid of the churning void or familiar constellations. Buildings arranged in concentric rings, connected by covered walkways. At the center, a tower rose just high enough to dominate without imposing. Nothing suggested fortification. No walls, no gun emplacements, no visible defenses except the shimmering outline of a shield dome flickering like heat haze at the perimeter. The transport descended smoothly, touched down on a landing pad. Warm air washed over me, dry, clean, carrying the scent of something growing. We were led through in single file, restraints removed as soon as we stepped onto solid ground. I expected cells, cages, barred doors, iron discipline. Instead, we were taken through corridors lined with something like frosted glass, soft, indirect, lighting emanating from the walls themselves. At intervals, hololithic displays showed pastoral landscapes, flowing water, green fields beneath twin suns. Images that felt like propaganda, rendered so beautifully it was hard not to pause and stare. Our handler walked beside us, speaking constantly in that same calm voice, explaining we were entering the orientation wing, where we'd remain 14 days while our health was evaluated and our psychological state assessed. Psychological state. The words hung in the air like smoke. My quarters were larger than any bunk I'd occupied aboard the Resolve. 4 meters by 3. A sleeping platform built into one wall. A small desk and chair beneath a narrow window. A hygiene alcove screened by a partition. Walls painted soft gray-blue, the color of dawn light on an ocean I'd seen once, on a civilized world whose name I no longer remembered. The window looked onto an interior courtyard where pale green vegetation grew in ordered rows beneath artificial sunlight. No bars. No lock on the door. I tested the handle. It opened freely. The corridor outside showed other prisoners being shown to similar rooms, all moving slowly, all wearing the same expression of bewildered weariness. A voice spoke from a small grill in the ceiling, smooth, genderless, welcoming me to the facility, informing me I'd find clothing, bedding, and basic supplies and storage beneath the sleeping platform. Meals would be provided 3 times daily in the communal dining area. I was free to move through designated common spaces whenever I wished. An orientation counselor would meet with me within the next solar cycle to discuss my transition process. Transition. The word felt heavier than it should. I sat on the edge of the sleeping platform, stared at the wall, tried to understand what kind of prison gives you freedom of movement and calls your captivity a transition. The first night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the platform, stared at the ceiling, listened to the silence. A silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Aboard the Resolve, there'd always been noise, the thrumming of engines, distant clangs of maintenance, murmured prayers from the chapel deck, sounds telling you the ship was alive and you were part of something vast, purposeful. Here nothing, just the faint whisper of recycled air through ventilation and occasional footsteps in the corridor outside. I tried to pray, but the words felt hollow, stripped of weight by the softness of the room, the absence of incense, the lack of any icon or aquila to focus devotion upon. I closed my eyes, tried to picture the Emperor enthroned in gold. The image slipped away like water through my fingers. The orientation counselor arrived next morning, announced by a soft chime from the door panel. I'd spent dawn hours pacing the small room, testing limits of confinement. When the door opened, I stood with my back to the window, arms crossed, trying to look defiant. The counselor was Tau, taller than the handler, skin the color of pale sapphire, eyes too large, too dark, entirely without malice. Simple robes in muted tones. A data slate tucked under one arm. They introduced themselves as Shasui Vela, a name that meant something in their language, shortened to Vire for my convenience. They asked if they could sit. I didn't answer. They sat anyway, lowering into the chair with a grace suggesting patience, not submission. Vire began by asking how I'd slept. The question was so mundane, so ordinary it caught me off guard. I said nothing. Vire nodded, made a notation on their slate, then asked if the room met my needs or if I required anything to feel more comfortable. I told them I didn't want comfort. I wanted to know what they planned to do with me. Vire set the slate down, folded their hands in their lap, looked at me with an expression that might have been sympathy if I'd been willing to interpret it that way. They said the facility existed to provide captured Imperial personnel opportunity to recontextualize circumstances and make informed decisions about their future. The process was entirely voluntary. I could refuse participation at any time, though refusal would naturally limit options. The goal wasn't punishment, but integration. I laughed. The sound came out harsher than intended, sharp, bitter. Vire waited until I finished before speaking again. They asked what I found amusing. I told them integration was just another word for betrayal. No Imperial citizen would ever willingly serve the enemies of mankind. Vire listened, expression unchanging. When I finished, they asked if I believed the Imperium valued my life, or if I was simply another replaceable component in a vast machine. The question wasn't rhetorical. They genuinely seemed to want an answer. I said my value was irrelevant. Service to the Emperor gave meaning to existence, and that meaning was worth more than survival. Vire nodded slowly, said they respected my conviction, but hoped I'd remain open to the possibility meaning could be found in other places. The days that followed settled into a rhythm designed to erode resistance through sheer normality. Each morning, I woke to soft light filtering through the window, the smell of something cooking in the communal dining area. Each morning, I dressed in plain gray clothing provided in storage, made my way through corridors to join other prisoners at long tables where food was served on clean trays by Tau drones moving with silent efficiency. The food was simple, but adequate: grain porridge, vegetable stews, protein blocks, tasting faintly of something I couldn't identify. Not corpse starch rations, not luxury, just sufficient. Other prisoners ate in silence or spoke in low voices about conditions of capture, ships they'd served on, homes they'd never see again. After the morning meal, we were encouraged to attend various sessions held in different wings, described as optional. But the daily schedule posted in common areas made it clear participation was expected. Physical conditioning in a gymnasium, with equipment adjusting to individual capability. Educational lectures on topics from agricultural efficiency to history of Tau expansion. Discussion groups facilitated by counselors like Vire, gatherings where prisoners were invited to share thoughts and feelings about circumstances in an environment described as safe, non-judgmental. I attended none of these. I spent my days in my room or walking the perimeter of the courtyard, testing limits of the invisible leash keeping us contained. The courtyard became my refuge, the only space feeling remotely like outside, even though I knew the sky above was artificial, and the plants cultivated for some purpose I didn't understand. I walked the same circuit each day, counting steps, memorizing layout, searching for weaknesses or exits. Benches placed at intervals beneath shade structures. Sometimes other prisoners sat there, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts I could only guess at. One man, older than me, scars suggesting lifetime of service, sat on the same bench every afternoon and wept quietly, shoulders shaking, hands pressed to his face. I never approached him. I didn't know what I could say that wouldn't sound like a lie. Vire continued visiting my room every few days, always polite, always patient, always asking questions feeling designed to peel back layers I didn't want exposed. They asked about my family. I told them I had no family except the crew of the Resolve, and they were dead or scattered. They asked about my duties aboard the ship. I described routines of gunnery maintenance and watch rotations with clinical detachment of someone reciting technical data. They asked what I believed about the Emperor. I gave them catechisms memorized in youth, verses about sacrifice and duty and eternal vigilance required to hold back darkness. Vire listened to all of it without judgment, then asked if those beliefs had brought me peace. I didn't answer. The question felt like a trap. The first crack in my certainty came during the third week. I was walking the courtyard when I heard singing, faint, distant, coming from a covered walkway connecting Outer Ring to Central Tower. The melody unfamiliar, neither Imperial hymn nor Underhive tavern song, but carrying a strange beauty making me pause despite myself. I followed the sound, found a small chamber where a group of prisoners sat in a loose circle, voices blending in harmony, led by a Tau figure standing at center with hands raised in a gesture suggesting both direction and invitation. The prisoners were singing words I didn't understand, but their faces were calm, almost serene, and that serenity disturbed me more than anger or despair would have. I turned to leave, found Vire standing behind me, having approached so quietly I hadn't heard them. They gestured to the chamber, asked if I wanted to join. I said I didn't sing. Vire said that was fine. Observation was also a form of participation. Many prisoners found communal activities helped them process emotions. I asked what language they were singing in. Vire said it was Tau Va, the common tongue of the Tau Empire. The prisoners were learning it as part of their educational curriculum. I asked why prisoners would need to learn the enemy's language. Vire corrected me gently. They weren't enemies, but individuals in transition. Language was a bridge to understanding. I walked away before Vire could say anything else. That night, I lay awake, thought about faces of the singers, how relaxed they looked, free of tension coiling in my chest like wire. I thought about the old man on the bench weeping every afternoon, wondered if he'd reached a breaking point I hadn't yet encountered, or if he was simply weaker than I was. I thought about Vire's questions, the way they never pressed when I refused to answer, never punished defiance, just made notations and returned a few days later with new questions digging a little deeper. I thought about the word transition, how it implied movement from one state to another, as if captivity were a temporary condition and compliance the natural end point. I prayed for strength, but the words felt rote, mechanical, like reciting a technical manual rather than communing with the divine. The second month brought changes to routine. New prisoners arrived, transferred from other facilities, captured in skirmishes I knew nothing about. Their arrival disrupting fragile equilibrium formed among those of us who'd been here longer. The new prisoners were angry, defiant, shouting curses at handlers, refusing to eat, barricading themselves in rooms, until counselors came and spoke through doors in voices so calm, steady, they could have been reading a weather report. I envied their anger, because it was clean, uncomplicated. I hated that my own anger had dulled into something closer to resignation. I told myself I was biding my time, waiting for opportunity that would never come. But the truth was, I no longer knew what I was waiting for. Vire's visits became less frequent but more focused. They began asking about specifics, doctrine I'd been taught, Stories I'd been told regarding Emperor's divinity, necessity of Imperium's cruelty. They asked if I'd ever questioned ethics of serving aboard a warship bombarding civilian populations, supporting ground campaigns resulting in deaths of billions. I told them such questions were irrelevant. Enemies of mankind deserved no mercy. Emperor's will was absolute. Vire asked if I'd ever met the Emperor or spoken to anyone who had. I said faith didn't require evidence. Vire said that was true, but faith built on incomplete information was fragile. I deserved access to all perspectives before committing to a single path. They brought me a data slate loaded with files, texts, recordings, historical analyses, presenting Imperium from perspectives I'd never considered. I refused to look at it for days, leaving it on the desk where Vire placed it, treating it like a live grenade. But curiosity is slow poison. Eventually I picked it up, telling myself I'd only glance at contents to understand what kind of propaganda they were using. The first file was a recording of an Imperial Guardsman describing Penal Legion deployment where soldiers were chained together, driven forward into enemy fire by commissars with bolt pistols. The Guardsman's voice was flat, exhausted, drained of everything except need to speak. He said he believed in the Emperor until he watched children conscripted into line and shot for cowardice when they froze in terror. He said the Imperium didn't care about humanity, only control. I stopped the recording, put the slate down, stared at the wall a long time. I told myself the Guardsman was lying, broken, had never truly understood necessity of sacrifice. I told myself isolated atrocities didn't invalidate greater purpose. I told myself these things, but the voice kept echoing in my mind, flat, unshakable, terrible in its honesty. I picked up the slate again, opened another file. Statistical analysis of Imperial resource allocation, showing vast majority of Imperium's production went to military and administratum, while entire hive cities starved and plague ran unchecked through underfunded Medicae facilities. Numbers presented without commentary, just raw data. That lack of rhetoric made them harder to dismiss. Over following weeks, I read more, always telling myself I was studying enemy arguments to better refute them, always finding new details unsettling me. I read about Tau integration of multiple species into empire, how they offered technology, education, autonomy in exchange for cooperation. I read about water caste diplomatic efforts, attempts to negotiate with imperial worlds, only to be met with execution squads and orbital bombardment. I read testimonies from former imperial citizens describing life in Tau settlements, access to medical care, education, opportunities for advancement Imperium never offered. I wanted to dismiss it all as lies, but sheer volume of documentation, consistency of accounts made dismissal increasingly difficult. Vire noticed the change in me during our next session. They asked if I'd examined the materials. I admitted I had, though I insisted it didn't change my fundamental loyalty. Vire asked what loyalty meant to me. I said it meant keeping faith with those who'd kept faith with me. Vire asked who had kept faith with me specifically. I found I couldn't answer, because crew of the Resolve were dead, and the Imperium as institution had never known my name. Vire let silence stretch until it became unbearable, then said loyalty to an idea was admirable, but ideas could be examined, revised, and doing so wasn't betrayal, but growth. I told them I didn't want to grow. I wanted to remain who I'd been. Vire asked if I was happy with who I'd been. I realized I didn't know how to answer that either. The singing sessions in the small chamber became more frequent, or perhaps I simply became more aware of them. I started lingering near entrance, not quite joining, but close enough to hear. Gradually, I recognized some voices as belonging to prisoners I'd seen in dining hall or courtyard. One was a woman named Kessa, served as Medicae aboard a transport ship. Kind eyes, a laugh sounding like it came from somewhere deep, genuine. She always nodded to me when we passed in corridors, even though I never acknowledged her. One afternoon, she approached me in courtyard, asked if I wanted to walk with her. I said I preferred solitude. She said that was fine, but if I ever changed my mind, she'd be around. She walked away before I could respond. I found myself thinking about Kessa more than I wanted to admit. She seemed content in a way, feeling wrong. as if she'd forgotten she was a prisoner or convinced herself captivity was acceptable. I watched her during meals, how she spoke easily with other prisoners, even with Tau staff, how she smiled when someone made a joke or offered small kindness. I wanted to hate her for contentment, but instead felt something closer to envy. One evening I saw her sitting alone on a bench, reading from data slate, and approached before I could talk myself out of it. I asked what she was reading. She looked up, surprised but pleased, said it was a manual on Tau medical techniques. They had treatment methods for conditions Imperium considered incurable. She asked if I wanted to sit. I sat. We talked over an hour, longest conversation I'd had with anyone since capture. Kessa told me about her life before Navy. Growing up in Manufacturing City, where air quality, so poor respiratory disease, was considered normal, children worked 12-hour shifts by age 8. She joined Medici Corps because it offered way off-world, chance to help people. But resources available to Navy Medici were minimal. Most work involved triaging casualties, deciding who was worth saving. She'd watch people die from infections preventable with basic antibiotics, from wounds treatable if supplies hadn't been diverted to more important campaigns. She said when Tau offered chance to actually practice medicine instead of just managing death, she'd felt relief mixed with guilt. I asked if she felt like a traitor. Kessa considered question seriously, expression thoughtful, then said she didn't know if word traitor applied when thing you betrayed had never valued you as anything more than resource. She said Imperium taught suffering was noble, self-sacrifice highest virtue, but Tau showed suffering often preventable, self-sacrifice only noble if achieved something meaningful. She said she was still working through what she believed, but felt more human here than she ever had aboard a ship treating her as disposable. I didn't know how to respond. We sat in silence until light faded and artificial stars appeared in dome overhead. Cold, perfect, wrong. Counseling sessions intensified during 4th month. Vire began introducing hypothetical scenarios, asking what I'd do given certain choices, how I'd weigh competing values, whether I believed past actions had been just or simply obedient. Scenarios never abstract, always grounded in specific situations like ones I might have encountered aboard Resolve. Questions about firing on civilian transports, possibly carrying enemy forces, following orders resulting in collateral casualties, ethics of Imperial tide system stripping worlds of resources, leaving populations to starve. I answered defensively at first, insisting war required hard decisions. Survival of humanity justified any means. Via never argued directly, but asked follow-up questions exposing contradictions in reasoning. One session stands out. Via asked if I believed Emperor would approve of Imperium's current state. Endless wars, brutal suppression of own citizens, stagnation lasting 10,000 years. I said Emperor designed Imperium, therefore must approve of its functioning. Vire asked if I thought Emperor, as being of immense power and intellect, would have intended vision remain unchanged for millennia, or if he might have expected adaptation, growth. I said speculation about Emperor's intentions was heresy. Vire asked if refusing to think critically was same as faith or simply fear. I stood up, left the room. Vire didn't follow me, but I knew they'd made their point. I began attending educational lectures, telling myself I was gathering intelligence, but knowing deep down I was looking for answers to questions I could no longer suppress. Lectures taught by Tau scholars, sometimes former Imperial citizens integrated into Empire, covering topics from xenobiology to historical analysis to ethical philosophy. One lecture examined origins of Imperial cult, ways it had been systematically constructed by ecclesiarchy to control population through fear, ignorance. Lecturer presented primary sources, documents from early Imperium showing Emperor himself rejected religious worship, intended secular rationalist society. Lecturer asked us to consider what that meant for validity of faith we'd been raised to accept as absolute truth. I wanted to call it propaganda, but sources verifiable, arguments coherent, presentation delivered without hysterical fervor I associated with heretical preaching. Lecturer didn't tell us what to believe, simply laid out information, invited us to draw conclusions. Afterward, during informal discussion, I found myself asking questions, challenging points disagreed with, but also genuinely trying to understand logic presented. Lecturer engaged respectfully, never dismissing concerns. By end of session, I felt mentally exhausted in a way almost satisfying. Hadn't engaged mind like that in years. Maybe ever. The change happened so gradually I didn't notice until already complete. Started sleeping better, tension easing. Started eating with more appetite, no longer viewing food as necessary chore, actually tasting, finding flavors not noticed before. Started participating in communal activities, not fully, but small ways. Sitting in singing sessions, joining discussion groups, exercising in gymnasium where equipment monitored progress. Adjusted to help improve. Told myself I was just passing time, maintaining fitness for escape that had never come. But truth was, I was no longer thinking about escape. I was thinking about what Kessa said about feeling more human here than in Imperium. Via noticed shift, began talking about next phase of transition. Word no longer made me flinch. They explained prisoners demonstrating psychological stability. Willingness integrate could move to secondary facility, receiving vocational training. Begin contributing to community. Goal wasn't to make me forget who I'd been, but help discover who I could become. I'd have choices about work wanted, life wanted build, choices mine alone. They said freedom wasn't just absence of chains, but presence of opportunity. I asked what happened to prisoners refusing integration. Vire said they remained in current facility indefinitely, cared for, safe, but limited in options. The choice was mine. I thought about that choice for weeks. Walked courtyard, sat in room, attended lectures, spoke with Kessa, and others made decisions or still struggling. Thought about resolve, crew served with years spent believing sacrifice only meaning life could have. Thought about guardsman's flat voice describing children shot for cowardice. Statistical data on Imperial resource allocation. Primary sources showing Emperor never wanted worshipped as God. Thought about all of it until thinking became unbearable. Then thought some more because only way through. Decision, when came, felt less like choice, more like admission of something known long time, but too afraid to acknowledge. I told Vire ready to move to secondary facility. They asked if certain. I said as certain as could be, which wasn't same as being certain, but apparently enough. They made notation on slate, set arrangements, made within week. Asked how I felt. I said didn't know. They said understandable, not knowing often first step toward wisdom. I laughed, real laugh. Vire smiled in way suggesting understood absurdity, finding wisdom in prison, designed reshape worldview. Transfer happened gray morning. Artificial sky, overcast simulating weather patterns. Packed few possessions accumulated, mostly clothing. Data slate Vire gave loaded educational materials. Walked through facility one last time, said goodbye to Kessa. Few others become something like friends. Kessa hugged, gesture felt alien but not unwelcome. Said proud of me, even though pride seemed wrong emotion. The old man weeping on bench was there, looked at me with empty eyes, said nothing. Wondered if he'd ever make choice or spend rest of life sitting bench, trapped between who he'd been and who couldn't bear become. Secondary facility larger, less controlled. Campus spread kilometers with workshops, residences, communal spaces, feeling like small city than prison. Assigned dormitory sharing 3 other former Imperial personnel. All further along transitions, employed various roles, supporting community. One worked hydroponic agriculture, another equipment maintenance. Third childcare for families of Tau Worker Station facility. They welcomed without judgment, showed around, explaining rhythms, expectations, freedoms. I asked if guards. They said security personnel, role protection rather than confinement. I asked what protecting from. They said from ourselves mostly. Guilt, confusion, sometimes driving people to self-harm. Given choice vocational programs, selected technical maintenance, because closest done aboard resolve. Needed something familiar anchor self. Training comprehensive, patient, taught by Tau engineers, treating me as student rather than prisoner. Answering questions without condescension. Learned systems never encountered. Technologies making Imperial engineering look crude. Found myself genuinely interested in way hadn't been interested anything for years. Work satisfying in way gunnery, maintenance never been. Because building, repairing rather than preparing tools destruction. Nightmares came first month secondary facility. Wake in dark, heart racing, skin damp sweat. Fragments dreams clinging mind like cobwebs. Dreamt resolve burning. Crew screaming bulkheads collapsed. Hands covered blood wouldn't wash away no matter scrubbed. Dreamt emperor's face. Stern, distant, judging, finding wanting. Dreamt parents dead, since child telling, dishonored memory. Dreamt Kessa, asking if happy, inability answer. Dreams left hollow, disoriented. Some mornings barely bring self-leave bunk. Facility had counselors trauma management. Assigned one named Aun El Shirori, introduced simply Xian. Listened descriptions nightmares, without offering platitudes, easy solutions. Xian said guilt natural response, profound change. Dreams minds way processing loss. Not just loss former life, lost certainties, structured identity. Said grieving, grief no timeline, no correct way move through. Only way out through. Didn't have walk path alone. I asked if nightmares ever stop. Xian said might lessen, probably never fully disappear. Some wounds leave scars, scars evidence survival. Began talking more openly counseling sessions. Describing things never put words before. Talk childhood under hive, violence, hunger, way people treated each other obstacles rather than fellow humans. Talked joining Navy escape, how believed service emperor give life meaning, belief only thing keeping functional. Talked contradictions ignored, brutality witnessed, participated, cognitive dissonance, managed simply not thinking too hard doing. Xian listened, asked questions, helped see patterns never recognized. Ways past shaped present obvious, subtle. Work became refuge. Through self-technical training, spending extra hours workshops, volunteering complex repair projects, earning reputation someone solved problems others found frustrating. Tau engineers began trust more responsibility. Eventually assigned team, maintaining facilities, power distribution network, role requiring technical skill, ability coordinate multiple departments. Found satisfaction work. Tangible results effort, fact labor creating something useful rather than destroying distant. Found satisfaction. Brought on guilt because how feel good serving enemy? But enemy began feel less enemy longer stayed. Worked alongside Tau engineers, speaking families, hopes future, frustrations bureaucratic inefficiencies. All mundane concerns ordinary people trying live ordinary lives. 8 meals former Imperial personnel made same choice. Talked past sadness, but growing sense found something better. Saw Tau children playing communal gardens, laughing. Chasing games, identical games, played child under hive. Saw all this, propaganda taught. Stories cruel xenos, enslaving humanity. Crushing individuality, began seem less truth. More like kind lie empires, tell justify endless war. Kessa visited 6th month, transferred secondary facility, completing own transition. Spent afternoon walking gardens, talking how much changed. Said working Medici clinics serving Tau and human populations. Treated more patients past 3 months than years aboard transport ship. Difference here resources actually heal people rather than just stabilizing return duty. Said finally doing work always want to do. I told glad for her, meant it. Though hearing talk contentment made own ambivalence feel sharper. Asked if happy. I said didn't know if happiness, right word. Said felt useful, engaged, less angry been, but also felt betrayed something fundamental, even if couldn't articulate what. Kessa nodded, said felt same way long time, guilt weight carried everywhere, but eventually realized Imperium never asked wanted, never cared happy, fulfilled, even alive as long useful. Said choosing self over Imperium, not betrayal, survival. Wanted believe. But belief required certainty, no longer possessed. Facility began feel less prison, more place simply lived. Perhaps most insidious change all. Woke mornings, following routines, felt natural. 8 meals, people company genuinely enjoyed. Worked projects, giving sense accomplishment. Attended lectures, discussions, challenging, thinking, ways stimulating rather than threatening. Had freedoms never possessed, aboard resolve. Freedom choose spend time, pursue interests nothing military function, express opinions without fear punishment. Had all this, yet felt losing something essential, even couldn't name what. Vire visited, occasionally checking progress, asking, adjusting. During one visit, asked question gnawing months. If facility designed break prisoners or rehabilitate. Vire considered carefully, said design neither. Designed offer alternatives. What prisoners did alternatives entirely up them. Said Tau Empire believed most humans choose cooperation conflict given genuine options. Loyalty built coercion fragile. Loyalty built mutual benefit durable. Said I proof principle. Hadn't broken, forced, simply shown different way living. Chosen because offered something Imperium never had. I asked prisoners never chose integration. Remained defiant until end. Vire said cared for, provided basic needs. Remained initial facility indefinitely. Tau Empire no interest punishing. But couldn't release if posed security risk. Some prisoners spent years state. Locked internal struggle never resolved. Kind tragedy Empire accepted cost, treating prisoners humanely. Thought old man bench, still weeping afternoon. Wondered ever find peace, or if defiance become prison long after physical walls ceased matter. First time used phrase greater good, without irony, during technical briefing, explaining repair prioritized benefit entire facility, rather than just apartment. Phrase slipped out naturally. Didn't realize said until saw teammate smile, not agreement. Felt jolt disorientation. Vertigo, as if ground shifted beneath. Excuse self, stepped outside breathe. Stood garden, stared artificial sky, tried remember why phrase once seemed heresy. Reasons felt distant, abstract, like read book rather than lived. Realization followed worse any nightmare. I no longer believed Emperor's divinity. Couldn't pinpoint when belief faded. Couldn't identify single moment apostasy. But some point slow accumulation questions, evidence, alternative perspectives. Faith evaporated like water vacuum. Still remembered catechisms, prayers, rituals, but no longer carried weight. No longer felt truth, just felt artifacts past self barely recognize. Felt relief realization. Relief terrified more anything else, because how feel relief losing foundation, entire identity. Confessed Sean next session. Asked how felt speak thought aloud. I said felt standing edge abyss. Cut last tether connecting who been. Sean asked if wanted step back edge, or see lay beyond. I said didn't know. Sean said not knowing acceptable. Didn't need answers immediately. Transformation process. Processes took time. Asked what believed now, if not emperor. I said believed work help people. Relationships built honesty. Possibility life more suffering. Sean said sounded solid foundation meaning. I said didn't feel enough. Final stage transition came 9th month. Informed approved release facility. Word release felt absurd. Hadn't felt imprisoned months. But formal change status came new freedoms, responsibilities. Relocated settlement Tau colony world. Work civilian contractor Earthcast, maintaining infrastructure, training humans technical skills. Receive stipend, housing, full access colony amenities. Free travel certain regions. Build life according preferences. In every practical sense, citizen, Tau, empire. Offer should filled horror. Instead, felt numb acceptance. Signed documents, formalized status. Attended final round evaluations, ensure psychologically prepared reintegration. Packed belongings, single bag, containing everything owned. Kessa, through small gatherings celebrate release. Sat among people become friends, listen talk plans, hopes future. Felt disconnected all, like watching self outside body. Someone asked if excited. I said supposed, though excitement not word chosen. Transport colony world comfortable, fast. Journey few days through routes not recognize. Past stars not name. Spent most trips staring viewport void. Thinking years spent aboard resolve. Certainty once felt. Man been considered death preferable path chosen. Tried feel regret. But regret required belief. Made wrong choice. No longer knew right choice been. Tried feel pride. But pride required belief. Made brave choice. Couldn't shake sense simply taken easiest path available. Colony called Tolku. Mid-sized settlement built river delta. World breathable atmosphere. Moderate climate. Architecture blend Tau design principles. Practical adaptations. Local conditions. Low buildings, wide windows, open courtyards. Infrastructure humming, quiet efficiency. Population mixed. Tau human. Several species not recognize. All moving streets, casual familiarity, people belonged. Assigned housing residential district near industrial quarter. Small apartment more space. Privacy ever known. Spent first night sitting balcony, watching sun set river, feeling absolutely nothing. Work exactly described, technical maintenance, training programs, 8 hours day, weekends free. Benefits including healthcare, retirement planning, access, educational resources. Coworkers friendly, professional, treated equal despite background. Settlement libraries, entertainment venues, communal gardens. All features, functional society. Attended social gatherings, made acquaintances, settled routines, should felt comfortable, instead felt hollow. Free, safe, productive, utterly empty. Emptiness persisted months. Went through motions living, doing job competently, maintaining apartment, exercising regularly, eating balanced meals. All behaviors well-adjusted individual. But nightstand, balcony, stare, stars, wonder become. Whether man been recognized version. Saw traitor, wearing skin. Thought resolve burning. Crew screaming. Prayers stopped saying, faith lost. Felt nothing, except vague, sense should feel something no longer knew how. Xian warned, might happen. Absence external structure disorienting. Freedom, without purpose, feel drifting. Suggested find communities, causes resonated. Build connections, replace severed. Tried. Joined volunteer organization providing disaster relief settlements affected natural disasters. Attended lectures, engineering, philosophy, xenobiology. Joined meditation group practicing techniques, adapted multiple cultural traditions. None filled void. None gave sense meaning lost stopped believing emperor watching, judging, caring choices. One evening found bar frequented former Imperial personnel. Humans made same transition, gathered share stories, support through ongoing process, redefining selves. Sat corner listened talk experiences, guilt, relief, confusion. Realized all struggling same questions. One man older, scarred said sometimes dreamed back aboard ship. Woke disappointed find comfortable bed, peaceful world. Woman augmetic eyes said no longer prayed. Sometimes caught whispering catechism stressed. Young man barely adolescence said felt given second chance life didn't know do. Spoke first time group. Said felt traded one prison another. Escaped physical, ideological confinement Imperium, only find trapped freedom, didn't know use. Said no longer believed emperor, but found replaced belief. Absence, felt wound, wouldn't heal. Said grateful safety, opportunity, absent suffering. But gratitude felt obligation, rather genuine emotion. Others nodded, shared similar feelings, acknowledgement not alone struggle, helped, but only little. Settlement small shrine, maintained watercast. Quiet space individuals various traditions reflect, meditate, sit silence. Started visiting early mornings, before work, not pray, because no longer knew who what pray, but sit think try process, tangle emotions, couldn't articulate. Shrine no icons, altars, just simple furnishings, windows look garden. Absence religious, symbolism felt liberating, terrifying. One morning Tao elder maintaining shrine sat beside, asked need to talk. I said didn't know needed. Elder said good place start. Talked over hour, elder asking gentle questions. Listening, without judgment tried explain dissonance past, present. Wei felt guilty not guilty enough. Wei felt relieved escaping Imperium, but ashamed feeling relief. Elder said transformation always difficult. Required letting go familiar pain, familiar certainties. Humans especially struggled. Imperium taught suffering virtue, certainty strength. Tao learned certainty illusion, accepting uncertainty, beginning wisdom. I said didn't feel wise, felt lost. Elder said being lost meant between destinations. Being between destinations meant still moving. Thought conversation days. Ideas still moving, still changing, still capable becoming something not yet in vision, offered perspective not considered. Had thought transition something completed, process definitive endpoint, but perhaps ongoing. Perhaps spend rest life negotiating between been, becoming. Negotiation, not failure, simply human condition. Perhaps emptiness felt not void filled, space inhabited. Space could build meaning peace, without crushing weight absolute conviction. Started engage more intentionally life, Tolku. Took responsibility work, mentoring technicians, proposing system improvements, increasing efficiency. Deepened involvement disaster relief organization, traveling settlements hit storms, floods helping rebuild infrastructure. Attended cultural events, learned Tao art, music, literature. Finding beauty forms never encountered. Appreciating expressed truths, transcended species. Made friends, genuine friends, people cared about me. Relationships built shared interests rather than shared trauma, shared doctrine. Kessa visited second year, Tolku. Now working major medical facility, another colony world. Spent week together catching up, exploring settlement, talking far both come. Said seemed grounded last time seen, less haunted left behind. I said still struggled. Struggle felt less overwhelming, less drowning, more swimming current. Said progress, supposed right. Talked Imperium, remembered, learned forget, agreed neither ever go back even wanted. People been no longer existed. One night drunk local beverage, tasted fermented fruit, asked forgiven self. I said didn't know needed forgiveness for. She said for surviving, choosing self, letting go beliefs killing. I said working, but forgiveness felt simple, clean, done more complicated right wrong. She said maybe point, Imperium taught think absolutes, learning live gray spaces own form liberation. Said forgiven self not, because believed made right choice. Believed made only choice could live, enough. Years passed, routines became life. Advanced career, eventually leading regional maintenance division, employing dozens technicians. Supporting infrastructure multiple settlements. Developed hobbies. Learning play stringed instrument popular human population. Cultivating small garden balcony, grew herbs, vegetables. Formed romantic attachments, didn't last taught things, self not known. Attended births, children friends, funerals died age, accident. Full cycle life community feeling increasingly home. But question never left. Late night couldn't sleep, quiet moments mind wandered. Found thinking facility, process brought here, whether truly chosen path. Simply shaped forces subtle resist. Thought buyers patient questions, educational materials, communal activities. Way entire system designed integration feel natural, inevitable. Thought other prisoners made different choices, whether defiance, courage, stubbornness. Simply different response, same unwinnable situation. Thought Imperium. Brutality witnessed, lies taught, ways participated systems oppression without questioning. Because questioning meant confronting uncomfortable truths. Thought Emperor. Whether approve humanity, become name. Whether whole edifice, betrayal, original vision. Thought Faith, certainty. Ways could shield, prison, protecting doubt, trapping rigidity. Thought all, reached no conclusions, because some questions no answers. Only ongoing work living uncertainty. Xian right. Nightmares never fully stopped. Changed form, less frequent, but occasionally wake dark taste ash mouth. Sound screaming ears remnants past refused fully buried. Learned sit moments, acknowledge without letting define. Understand trauma, leaves marks, fade never, fully disappear. Scars evidence survived. Survival, came understand, own kind victory, even felt hollow. 10th anniversary captured visited shrine, sat same spot spoken elder years before. Garden outside matured, plants fuller, established. Watched light change sun move sky, thought decade past, person become. Not man served aboard resolve. Not prisoner arrived facility broken, defiant. Someone else, someone still not fully understand. Someone learned live without certainty, find meaning work, relationships, quiet satisfaction life, lived without constant fear. Thought question Kessa, asked, forgiven self. Realized answer yes no. Accepted done, choices made. Stopped punishing surviving, changing, letting go beliefs destroyed. But forgiveness implied cleanness, resolution never feel. Would carry weight past forever, knowledge been, done, abandoned. Weight not punishment, simply part who. Elder found their sun setting, same elder, perhaps different, couldn't tell. Sat beside, ass found looking. I said stop looking, started living. Felt progress. Elder said, wisdom, or beginning. Sat comfortable silence light faded. First stars appeared sky. Stars not emperors distant judgment. Simply lights vast indifferent universe. Beautiful, meaningless, enough. Left shrine night fell, walked apartment through streets knew well, past faces recognized. Through life built piece wreckage, everything lost. Thought facility, process transition, whether rehabilitation, indoctrination, something between. Thought Imperium cruelty, whether cruelty service, survival different cruelty service control. Thought questions no answers, realized asking more important finding solutions. Reached apartment, stood balcony, last time looking Tolku spread beneath. Lights settlement twinkling artificial stars, river reflecting moons. Whole scene peaceful, ordinary, utterly alien universe born. Thought man been chose death life, saw peace weakness, freedom heresy. Thought sympathy understanding certainty armor, universe brutal face, without protection. But armor become cage, war long. Didn't know Tau mercy kinder, Imperium brutality, both simply different forms control. Systems design shape, individuals, components, served larger purposes. Didn't know broken, healed, simply changed beyond recognition. Didn't know become better, worse simply different ways, defied moral judgment. Didn't know any, learned live not knowing. New here, alive. Free choose spend days, meaning assigned existence. Whether keep moving forward allows sink emptiness, sometimes threaten consume. New choices mine, having choices gift burden. Freedom meant responsibility. Responsibility, exhausting only thing made life worth living. New enough. Stars above cold, distant, uncaring, always been. Indifference no longer felt abandonment, felt space. Room breathe, grow, become something not yet imagine. Stood balcony watched night deepen, felt weight past, uncertainty future. Fragile present existed between. Thought perhaps meant human, carry contradictions, live ambiguity, find meaning not absolute truths, ongoing work being alive. When inside closed door, prepared sleep, knowing nightmares might come, would wake, continue process living. Continuation, own form defiance, against Imperium, wanted die, Tau wanted remade image. Neither martyr convert, something messier, complicated. Person survive changing, change surviving. Messy, complicated survival mine. Last thought sleep took. Facility not broken, not saved. Simply offered choice should always had. Choice question, change, live, without crushing, wait certainty. Whether choice manipulation, liberation, never know. Made, brought here. Here place breathe, think, exist, without constant terror. Not happiness. Not redemption. Simply life. After everything through. Simply living felt more any right.